Secret of the Mimic is coming out in a few months, and the trailer we just got for it is already blowing up pieces of the lore. I made a whole trailer breakdown for it right here, but this didn't really fit in that video. This being what that game is going to say for the books versus games canonicity debate. Characters like the Mimic and Edwin Murray seem to be confirming that the Tales from the Pizzaplex books are one-to-one with the game's timeline, and I think they are. But already, just with this trailer, there are some issues that put that up to question, and we need to talk about it, because if what I'm worried could be happening is happening, Secret of the Mimic might have FNAF's biggest retcon in history. So slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. And yes, I fought with it for like half a year at this point. The mic is going to be right up at my face again because it just sounds best. That way, I know I'm like the only person that cares about how the microphone sounds, but I care about how the microphone sounds. Let's start with what the trailer is establishing. Just from the voiceover alone, we know that Edwin Murray was contracted by Fazbear to make the Mimic, an endoskeleton that can wear any suit and learn just from observing its environment. And note, this is what I'm saying Fazbear Entertainment themselves are saying. So yes, any truth they tell us is up to speculation since Fazbear lies a lot. Moving on, we don't actually see any Fazbear characters in the trailer except for possibly this early version of DJ Music Man. And like, he becomes a Fazbear character, but is he at this point? It's hard to tell. Regardless, that does make sense because in the first trailer, we get the year 1979. And at the PAX West booth, we got this poster, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza coming soon. So this building exists before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza ever opened. So obviously there aren't Freddy's characters yet. So that being said, let's compare that information with what we know about this story from the books. In the story The Mimic, Edwin is contracted by Fazbear to turn costumes into robotic replicas. We get direct mentions of a yellow chicken with metal feathers on her head, this one obviously being Chica. And while he does make the Mimic in this story, he does it for the sole purpose of entertaining his kid David. He doesn't do it for Fazbear, even though they reclaim it later when they collect all of his assets. He makes it specifically to play with and babysit his son David because he doesn't want to be a good dad. It's also noteworthy that he owns a factory and nearby mansion, but him and David live full-time in the factory that's filled with several different costumes. So putting the Secret of the Mimic trailer up against the story The Mimic from the books, a lot of things seem to line up fairly one-to-one. The location being this large factory, the names of these characters and what they create, not just the Mimic but the other costumes in the factory too. Several characters mentioned in this factory show up in the trailer, like the yellow dog, the pink and yellow-green jester, the Mushroom Man, and more. All of those are direct references to the books. The only thing that doesn't seem to line up one for one is why the Mimic was created in the first place. Like I mentioned, in the books, although Fazbear does eventually claim the Mimic when seizing all of Edwin's assets, they didn't contract him to make the Mimic. They only contracted Edwin to make these robotic replicas. He made the Mimic because he didn't want to watch his kid. But remember that I pointed out that Fazbear Entertainment is the ones telling us that Edwin made the Mimic for Fazbear's. So they could just be lying at that point. In the story The Mimic, the engineers that were sent to collect the stuff Edwin was working on weren't told about the Mimic. The first team happened upon it and repaired it, and it killed them, and the second team came upon the repaired one and it killed them. So all of this can be very easily alleviated if we just assume that Fazbear's started getting more and more dead engineers not coming back, learned about the Mimic, and then started warning engineers ahead of time, being like, oh yeah, and he made this Mimic for us, get that while you're there. It's dangerous though, so be careful. So then everything's good, right? Like I said in the title and the thumbnail and the intro that this game could have the biggest retcon in FNAF's history ever of all time. And so far, everything's good. If Fazbear is lying, then there's no issues. Edwin was contracted to make the Freddy Fazbear Pizza animatronics, and he also made the Mimic, and when he goes missing, Fazbear sends engineers to collect everything. So when we play Secret of the Mimic, we'll be collecting the Freddy Fazbear's animatronics and the Mimic. If that's right, that's the retcon. That's the big issue. At least, according to FNAF 6, it is. FNAF 6, or the full legal Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, had one of the best endings in the entire franchise, with the Henry monologue at the end of the completion ending. The one that goes, "Connection terminated." And basically half of the FNAF fandom just started reciting the rest of the monologue. And it's cool, but it does overshadow the other Henry monologue in that game from the Insanity ending. Granted, it's way weirder to get the Insanity ending, arguably easier because you just need to buy one thing, but you have to buy Egg Baby of all things, and then in the night gameplay you have to hold the button to get the Insanity. It's a weird ending, but it provides us another Henry monologue, one where he's contemplating everything that's happened so far and lamenting his role in it, and he says this line.
Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose.
He describes the current situation as the missing child incident victims being trapped in prisons of his making. So if he made the prisons that the missing child incident victims are in, then one of two options is possible here. Either he killed the missing child incident victims and stuffed them into the suits, ergo putting them into the prisons, or he built the prisons themselves, the Freddy's animatronics, the original Freddy Fazbear Pizza cast. We also know from the Silver Eyes that Henry was a technological genius and behind most of the innovation at Fazbear's. So putting all these facts together, many fans assumed this was confirmation that Henry built the original Fazbear animatronics and William was the one who killed the kids, stuffed them into the suits, and ruined everything. And therein lies the issue with the inclusion of Edwin Murray. If Secret of the Mimic is going to come out and tell us that actually Edwin Murray built the original Fazbear animatronics and Henry didn't, then this line would no longer make any sense. After all, we know for certain that William killed the kids. So what prisons did Henry make? Not only that, but if Henry never made the animatronics, what is his point in the story? Because then he's like just some guy who owns part of the company. But if Edwin didn't make the Freddy's animatronics and Henry did, then the books can't be fully canon to the games. The details aren't exactly one-to-one. Finally, the end of the river of this cave, and it's going into a sewer grate. Well, there's a ladder underneath. I guess I can just... Oh, wait a minute. There's a sponsor here too. Today's video is sponsored by Factor. Making food from scratch is one of my favorite things to do, but realistically, me and my wife have 2 kids, and we don't get to eat our own food until like 8 or 9 o'clock most days after our kids are asleep, and I do not want to cook an entire meal from scratch when it's dark out. But luckily, Factor is here to help. Factor has countless ready-to-eat meals that are fresh, never frozen, and are chef-crafted, dietitian approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Factor takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get over 35 meals to choose from every week delivered right to your door, including options like keto, calorie smart, veggie, and vegan, and more, which is great because me and my wife are currently on keto. Not only that, but Factor now offers loads of snack options, like breakfasts, smoothies, juices, small bites, and more to keep you going no matter what the schedule has in store. I actually got sent 4 of those juices, and my favorite by far is the apple kale wheatgrass juice, which makes sense since I just love apple juice anyway. By the way, the meals we ate during this promo are the salmon pesto and the chicken Florentine, both of which were delicious. If you want to try out Factor, then head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50RYTOAST to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's code 50RYTOAST at factor75.com or clicking the link below to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. Thank you again to Factor for sponsoring today's video. All right, here goes everything. So what's the answer here? Well, in trying to figure that out, I came up with what I think are fairly reasonable predictions with how they're going to square all this away. One of them I think is less likely, and the other 2 I think are equally likely, but I believe one more than the other. So let's start with the least likely option that is still plausible, and that's Help Wanted. For those of you who don't remember, Help Wanted introduced 2 very important things at the same time. Through direct quotes and implied inclusions of animatronics, Help Wanted established that FNAF 1 through 6 are in-universe games, and that Fazbear claims an indie dev made them to smear the name of Fazbear Entertainment, and they're all false. However, at the same time, Help Wanted clarifies via Tape Girl that Fazbear themselves hired the indie dev, and all of the games are describing real and true events that happened. These things did actually happen, but Fazbear is trying to use this to muddy the stories and cover everything up. If the missing child incident happened, that would be a big news story, but it's also 5 murders that happened in a small town in Utah. It probably wouldn't be that big of a story nationally or worldwide. So wait 20, 30, 40, 50 years when we get closer to the 2020s and 2030s, and you release video games restating all of this stuff. Now, if you hear about Fazbear Entertainment missing child incident and you go to Google that, you don't get the news articles from the 1980s, you get the recent results, the fan wikis of FNAF 1, and they they muddy the water. And now if you try to be like, oh, well, did you know like these games are talking about real things that happened? People will look at you and go, you're crazy. That's insane. I bring this up because a lot of the time when I mention that Help Wanted establishes that FNAF 1 through 6 are in-universe games, some people hear, oh, so nothing before Help Wanted matters anymore. And that's not true. All that this does is tell us that the games do describe real events, but they are made by an unreliable narrator. And I'm trying to say that that is Scott and Steelwool basically being like, look, those old games are great and they do correctly describe the majority of the FNAF lore, but they are not fully accurate. So if there are minor retcons moving forward, trust the newer games first. It's basically Scott and Steelwool being like, we want to keep telling this story and want to go back and showcase these things, but like if Toy Chica has the wrong amount of toes, don't blow up and assume it's a new character. We're just adjusting things as we go along. So the first plausible explanation for Edwin and Henry making the same animatronics is that this is a Help Wanted retcon. This is, sure, the game said it was Henry, but in reality, it was Edwin Murray. Now, I think this is the least likely option, because this is that massive retcon I talked about, and I don't think that this serves the story enough to be warranted, or it's something that would want to be changed. It seems like way bigger of a retcon than Help Wanted is asking us to allow. So if I don't think it's this possibility, what about the other two that I do think are way more likely? Well, we'll start with the one that I don't personally believe, but I think is very likely. Option 2. Secret of the Mimic is going to show us that the Tales from the Pizzaplex games are not fully accurate to the game's timeline, but instead will give us plenty of evidence to assume that this is a Silverized situation. Essentially, the characters, places, and things carry over, but the details and the plot lines are different. Think about the Silverized. We have William Afton, Henry Emily, Fazbear's, all of these things, but in the books, Henry makes a robotic version of Charlotte Emily after she dies and artificially ages it up until eventually she is the one who kills William Afton, and that definitely does not happen in the games. Similarly, Secret of the Mimic could be trying to tell us that yes, Edwin Murray, David, they all exist, and the creation of the Mimic is pretty much the same as it is in the books, but some of those details are different. He didn't make the initial Fazbear animatronics. The other Tales in the Pizzaplex stories are slightly different than the games, etc., etc. This would also explain why Fazbear says that Edwin made the Mimic for them. He didn't in the books, but the games would then be different from the books. And I think that is a very likely possibility here, but it's not the one I think we're going to see in June, because I believe most strongly in option number 3, that the books are fully connected to the games, but Edwin never finished the job. As far as I'm aware, in the books, we never see Edwin fully finish the commission from Fazbear Entertainment. His son David died because he was a bad father and left the door unlocked. So when his ball rolled out, David was like, where is my ball? Ran out on the road and there was a car. How many times am I gonna reference that damn song? Anyway, David dies before Edwin finishes the commission from Fazbear, and we don't get to see what happens to Edwin after that. He kind of just goes into a grief spiral, beats up the Mimic, and then we cut to way in the future. But the fact that Fazbear is sending engineers to collect whatever Edwin had been working on, to me says that he didn't finish the job, or at least never submitted a finished product. So it's totally possible that both in the books and the games timeline, Edwin was initially commissioned to create the Freddy Fazbear Pizza animatronics, but David died before he was able to finish the job and he quit entirely, and then they had to turn to Henry to create them, allowing them both to be hired to build them, but only Henry finishes it. But to be fair, I do see one issue with this theory, because it feels like it fits perfectly and answers this issue, but if Henry could have originally built the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza animatronics in the first place, why would they have ever commissioned a third party to do it? Like, if Henry had this capability, why didn't he build them from the start? My best guess is this leans on the whole publicly traded company theory I've been purporting for a while now, that Fredbear's Family Diner is a private company only owned by Henry and William, and when they opened Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, they opened it under a new public company, Fazbear Entertainment, a public company that's beholden to shareholders and investors. And the only explanation I could think of is that those shareholders and investors wanted to prove that Henry and William weren't necessary to the creation of this restaurant, and therefore contracted an outside engineer to create the animatronics. And then when that failed, they just went, fine, Henry, you can make them, but just don't put your name over everything. Other than that, I can't think of a single good reason why, if Henry could make them, they'd go to Edwin in the first place. Once again, we don't have enough information to definitively settle book versus games until at least Secret of the Mimic comes out. And there's a good chance it'll come out and we still can't settle this debate. But I'd love to hear where you land on it in the comments below. Because if we see Edwin Murray made the original Freddy's animatronics, then every timeline is going to be deeply changed. But we'll have to wait till June to find that out. And I know I'll be streaming it day one on this channel, because after all, I live stream 4 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday at 9 p.m. EST. And you should go ahead and click the card on the top right to follow my Twitch page. In the meantime, if you need a break from deep diving onto FNAF lore, last week I made a theory on a game whose lore isn't so convoluted, Poppy Playtime. And I'm really confident in it. You can find that right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with hashtag ToastArt. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty slices.